Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So I just kind of wanted to go through things quickly. I don't have a lot of time. I thought I would have more time this week, but I don't. Our spell book of the month is City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert, who's also the woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She kind of already peaked when she had Julia Roberts play her in the memoir of her life, but City of Girls is really good. It is essentially historical fiction. It's basically a retrospective of a woman's life. I've already said this a few times, but definitely sort of enjoy it as a older woman spinning a yarn. That's definitely what's happening. My hair is like really big today. Cool. So yeah, it's a very like cozy, comforting read, I think. And very funny. The narrator is definitely very voicey, so you get kind of into her sense of humor and her view of the world, which sort of adapts as she is writing, or as she's telling this story. So yeah, someone has asked if I would do another round of the Olivie personality quiz. If you weren't around for that, basically you can send me 3 or 4, that's it, of your favorite stories, one-shots, etc. You can send me 4 titles maximum, and then I will tell you what that means about your personality. I think initially this started because I was saying that I understand which stories have all the same themes and why some people are attracted to some stories and not the others, and hence this sort of experiment, which turned out to be a little bit weirdly accurate, very scientific, obviously, as you could probably guess. Well, anyway, and I don't have anything to drink. This is going well. This is not a mess. Everything's fine. I've been a little sick, so don't worry about it. Okay, so first question, how much planning should be done when writing a novel? One thing, it really depends on you and how much planning you need, but one thing I want to tell you is that most people make the mistake of thinking that planning a novel is this is the same thing as planning first draft. And the truth is that your first draft is probably not the novel. That's like the harsh truth in terms of the difficulties of writing. It's hard enough to get a first draft. What's much harder is to note that your first draft has flaws and that you have to go back and change things and sometimes rewrite things and sometimes remove things. That can be really difficult. So I don't plan all that much. I work with essentially a living outline where I initially sit down and I say, less than half a page, these are like the 6 major things that are going to happen in the story. And then each time I hit a milestone, so to speak, I sit down and go into a little bit more detail about what's going to happen in the chapters that fall into that event happening and how that happens. So at the beginning, my outline is like less than half a page, like honestly like 6 lines. And then by the end, the outline has been fleshed out to 3 or 4 pages. And I'm doing that as I go, because a lot of times it's hard, especially if you're writing a character-driven story, to know what's going to happen in advance, because you can't necessarily predict how your characters are going to behave until you arrive there. Almost all of my books have had some major plot overhaul. One for My Enemy initially had a different ending. It was the same ending, but things happened in a different way. And then when I wrote it, I was like, these motivations don't make sense. So I wrote it again. People will often ask, how do I plan writing a novel? And what they mean is, how do I plan a first draft? And the first draft, you kind of have to remove the first draft as like, it's not going to come out perfect the first time. So you can just kind of take that off the table. It just really isn't going to. Even if you wrote the perfect first draft and then you sent it to an agent or a publisher, they would still have edits, and it's likely that you would have to work with it. So one of the first most humbling things about writing is knowing that you cannot plan to write the novel in one sitting. So you might as well get comfortable with the idea of change as you go, adapting as you go. How much planning should be done? There's no correct answer to that. It really just depends what your writing style is, and if this is your first book, you have no way of knowing what your writing style is. My driving instructor, I really hated this, but my driving teacher once said it's not possible to be a good driver until you've been driving for 10 years. And at the time I thought that was an annoying thing to say, but I kind of get what he means. that you can't really see every problem that's going to come your way until you've already been on the road for a long time. So even if you're good at what you're currently doing, you maybe don't know how to handle when you hydroplane or something like that. You know, you can't be prepared for every possibility until you've done it many times. So I wouldn't be too concerned if this is your first novel. I would not be too concerned with planning. I have said before that I do think that sometimes people use planning as a method of procrastination, or it kind of means that they're afraid to start. A blank page can be really intimidating, and therefore it's a little bit easier to just say, oh, well, I'm just going to plan out what my characters look like and put together a file of face casts or whatever. But yeah, there is no substitute for just writing and for editing as you go. This is a tough question. Hi, Olivie. As many people have noted, you always write such witty dialogue that sounds extremely realistic and eloquent. It's one of the best aspects of rereading How to Win Friends and Influence People and The Commoner's Guide to Betting Royal. Thank you. I wish I could emulate this in real life, but in reality I am too slow and nervous, so my sentences always come out jumbled or I trail off. Is there a way to get better at real-life banter? So first I want to say that you don't have to be a person who is good at banter. You shouldn't. I think you're creating a little bit of anxiety for yourself because you want to make the people around you laugh, or maybe you want to have a certain kind of conversation and that's difficult. I mean, the trick to banter is that it's quick-paced. So it can require you to think quickly and to have an answer ready to go, or that's what maybe you think should be happening. But just a little secret from me to you from a writing perspective, the really important thing about banter and about dialogue is that you can't remove a single line. And this is why. Because the most important thing about a conversation is that you are listening to the other person who's talking. So ideally, the reason that the banter is good is because each of the characters are building off what the other person has said. And that's why listening is such an important feature. They can't just say something funny because they had something funny stored up. It has to be, oh, I recognize that the person who's in this conversation someone has made sort of an offbeat observation, or someone said something that relates to some shared history that we have. The reason that the conversation feels sort of hopefully smooth and quick like that is because they are listening to each other. They're definitely having a conversation and they're actively participating. So one thing I would warn you away from is kind of giving into that anxiety of, I don't know what to say next, and then the conversation just becomes about the pressure to speak. Nobody likes that. I can't teach you how to get better at banter. Don't overcomplicate things. I've said before that one of the errors I see with people who try to write bantery dialogue is that they sometimes it's overcomplicated. They try to say too much, and a normal person would never just say a long string of words. You know, usually in conversation, you are doing more of a quip back and forth kind of situation. It has a lot to do with the comfort the characters have with each other. So your comfort in the conversation is also very important. The way you get better at anything is practice, but I don't really know how to tell you to practice conversation. I guess try to spend time around people you feel comfortable with, which feels like weird advice to give. But as with all conversation skills, listening is the important thing. I think I just really wanted to tell you that, in any of those scenes, if you were to remove one line, the whole thing would fall apart because most of the dialogue is building on top of something that someone else has said until it becomes sort of this overall joke, not just one person's lines. So I don't know if that actually helps, but yeah, try not to stress yourself out over it. I know that's a ridiculous thing to say because none of us can prevent that sort of thing, but I think there's a reason that a lot of people, not everybody loves that type of personality. There's a reason that all those characters, especially in Commoner's Guide, don't have any outside friends. It's because they rely so much on their shared history and their inside jokes that when other people enter the story, they're like, I don't understand what these people are talking about, and I also don't care about what they're talking about. So I guess that's just a warning. Hi, Olivie. This is not related to Harry Potter and more of a life question. welcome. Sounds like you might be new. I do a lot of life questions. But I wanted to know if you lived with Mr. Blake or anyone with a romantic relationship before being married, and whether you would recommend it for someone who's been with their partner for 2 years, like everyone says. So I don't know if you, well, to answer your question, Mr. Blake and I moved in together after 6 months, which was very, very quick, especially given our ages at the time. I don't know if you're trying to talk, if you want, I don't know what you want me to say. I definitely think, while it's certainly possible, of course, to have a good marriage from a good relationship foundation. I mean, to start with, if you've been with your significant other for 2 years, that's pretty good. I would say that the honeymoon period ends around 1.5 years. I think that you can know a person before then, but you can't necessarily know how they handle conflict or stress. Usually, you need to see someone go through a difficult time in order to really understand what they are, how they cope, how they fight, how they deal with negativity. All that stuff can be really important, and you can't really predict when that's going to happen. I say 1.5 years because it usually takes 1.5 years before something happens to really throw a wrench in your relationship, typically. That's not a hard and fast rule, but that's just what I've observed. And it's kind of the same thing with living together. You don't really know what a person is like until you've lived with them in close quarters. There's a lot that you can hide from someone, and I don't mean this in a scary way, like, oh, don't marry someone if you've never lived with them. It's just that I've described marriage before as like, it is different because this being married versus being in a committed relationship is different, because with marriage, the stakes are a little bit higher. I always describe it as, once you get married, it's like all these lights are illuminated, and suddenly from where you're standing, you can see that you're at the beginning of this very long hallway, and there's all these doors on either side of you, but you can only enter one door at a time, really. So you start at, say, the 20s door, and there's kind of this concept of like, okay, you're in this room, but you don't want to disturb anything in this room that might ruin something in one of the other rooms. You can't go into those other rooms. You don't know what's there. You don't know what's in the 40s or the 50s room, or in the parenting room, or in the lost their job room, or the financial troubles room. But you know that something you do now could break something that's in one of the other rooms. This is a weird metaphor, I know, but just go with it. This is what makes marriage different, is because the way that you handle something now could change whether you guys resent each other in the future, or if you handle a problem badly now, how is it going to be handled when something bigger comes up? And it's just that, yes, those realities are still there when you're dating, but they don't feel as real. They don't feel like a decision I make today might have some impact on what our relationship looks like when we are our future versions of ourselves. And Mr. Blake and I, one of the great things about our relationship is that we really are good roommates. And I would say that it would be difficult for a lot of people to live with him, or probably to live with me. I don't know. I don't really know what it's like to live with me, but I know with him, it's hard. For example, if you say you were the sort of person who liked to have your own space, or you like to have quiet time, you could not live with Mr. Blake, because when he's here, he needs at least my partial attention at all times. He gets weirdly lonely if we're in the same place, but I have headphones in, or he's watching a TV show and I'm not also watching it, like I'm doing something else. He needs me physically close to him or paying attention to him. And I like that, because touch is my love language, and so that's perfectly fine with me. If he wants me to sit next to him on the couch while he watches a football game and I read a book, fine. But if you were the sort of person who needed your space, this would constantly weigh on you over time, I would think. And this is also something you might not understand until you actually occupy this person's space all the time. I always say that how a person deals with conflict is really important, and you could get around that if you didn't live together. Because if you came back from a bad day and wanted to decompress, you could do that in your own space. But if you come back from a bad day and you snap at them the moment you walk in the door, and that turns into a fight and it makes your whole day worse or your week worse because you guys don't fight well, which Mr. Blake and I are an example of a couple who did not fight well. Initially, he would get really defensive and I would get really mean, and it would not be productive, and it would be days of tension, and that's something that we had to work on. And it's this kind of stuff that you want to know. You want a strong foundation. You want that first room to be, you want to treat everything in that first room as lovingly as possible so as not to disturb anything further down the hallway, so that you can still be excited about opening future doors and not opening one and finding out that something you did back there broke one of the bookshelves. I don't know if that's making any sense. I'm just saying I can't think of a reason why you wouldn't want to live with someone first before marrying them. But I don't think there's any hard and fast rules about relationships. I think it just depends. It's your relationship, and whatever makes things easier for you. It's just that the only thing, it's not so much the commitment, it's not so much the forever of it, it's just you want to set yourself up for the best possible version of your relationship moving forward, and that might involve knowing who that person that you're with really is, and sometimes that requires being their roommate to understand it. Okay, so I gotta go, but like I said, definitely let me know if you want to do the personality quiz. I will post about it on Tumblr. If you're following the Advent, that is posting every day. Thank you so much for following along. I'm having a lot of fun. And yeah, so it'll be a little longer next week probably if we do the personality quiz. If you have any other concerns, go ahead and bring them to my attention. It has also come to my attention that it might be really dark in here because I think it's about to rain. So my apologies. But this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.